Welcome to the Solution Architect Show. I'm your host, Ben. Today, I'm super happy to welcome our first guest, Andrea, to our show. Andrea has worked as a software architect for big companies and small companies. She even started her own company, so she can bring quite a unique perspective on how architecture integrated with engineering. So, welcome, Andrea.
Well, thank you very much for being invited here, and I'm especially happy to be the first guest. Hopefully, it doesn't put you off from hosting other people in the future. So, yeah, as you were saying, over my career, I worked in companies big and small, and I was part of making decisions in all of them. And when I have to think about how to define architecture, it's all about that kind of record of decisions, and that's kind of what makes a system. Right. So it's like these layers of decisions that one on top of the other affect each other for now and the future. And yeah, that's a
Yeah.
little bit about me.
Yeah, cool. Welcome, Andrea. So I think as a solution architect, I got asked a lot around how I get into solution architecture. Do you want to share your career journey around where you started and how you get into software architecture or solution architecture?
Sure. And it's funny. I don't know if I've ever had the title of solution architect. However, my journey to architecture has been engineering, engineering, engineering. And then one day someone told me, "Oh, you're the architect, right?" And I'm like, "Well, no." But basically, other people started calling me an architect, and that's when I kind of went, "Oh, okay, I need to formalize this and get better at at everything that involves architecture, because at the end of the day, if other people are leading on me to do this work, I need to actually be better at it." And I find that's how a lot of people that come from engineering end up in a role like this, even if you're in a career ladder that gets you to be, that's what you want to do. Even at that point, you start doing architecture. And I think a lot of people do decision making as architects without the title. And it's actually can be good because it unblocks things, and can also be bad because people are not realizing that the decisions that they're making have an impact, not just now. So it's like, how do you train to be better at making those decisions?
Yeah, cool. That sounds very interesting. Definitely, as architect in the IT industry, we either making technical decision or we facilitate to having meetings or having some sort of a process to making sure that we can make the right decisions. So I guess moving on sort of to the next question that related to a discussion we had recently. As Andrea is coming from more of a software side, getting into the software architect, I'm more coming from a corporate side. I work on the local council or different sort of a company that software isn't their core business. So we had some good discussion around what's the difference between working as a solution architect among these two. And we get a lot of views. I think that post getting around 144,000 views as of today. So you can see there's a lot of people interested in that discussion or maybe get confused around the same role, but depending on the different companies actually serve quite a different purposes or their responsibility are quite different. I'll start with you, Andrea. Like you've been working in that software development company for pretty much all your career. Maybe you can give your take around, okay, what architect do in software development company?
For sure. So I think the experience of someone basically the experience and a lot of people that come from my side of the world, it's been something like, depending on the type of company. So depending on the type of company, you will have certain experiences. I want to make a parenthesis. I'm going to come back to this, which is your question, and say something that I think is really important. If we, like you and me, and probably everyone that engaged with the post, are trying to get clarity and understanding around this because we don't have it. Imagine people that don't do this, and what do they think about them? It's like, what do they do? They probably go like, I don't know. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that. It's like, if we don't have clarity, hope they have. And so coming back to my experience, what I know is that a lot of software teams, let's say you're in the type of organization that has an architecture group, right? So I think there's two experiences, and this is one. And I'm going to call this more kind of traditional architecture. Some people call it ivory tower. I don't know if that's offensive or not, but I'm just sharing the names that I see, the narratives that I see. So what happens there is there are some designs, something needs to happen, right? And there's some designs that are made, and you are not, sometimes you're somewhat involved in that decision making or not. And at some point, someone gives you this is a thing. Maybe if you're very lucky, you get a presentation. And this is work that you're supposed to do in maybe soon, maybe in a few months, right? So it's you get it, and then you have no way to give feedback. So this has two really bad side effects. The first one is that you have no way to give feedback. So if the design doesn't fit the reality or the reality of the problems, you can say, hey, have you considered this? Yeah, X, Y, Z. Sometimes, again, depending on the organization, you have better communication between architects and the engineering groups. And that feedback can happen. But also I've seen it be really bad and that not happening at all. The architect might as well have died. It's like, or left the company. Another interesting experience here is that architects like that tend to last less than 2 years in the role. That means you get something, they give you something because you haven't started doing anything. It takes a few months, you start doing the work, and when you want to talk to the person, they're gone. So this is some of the experiences, inefficiencies of working that way. I guess that's why it's called ivory tower, right? Because they feel the name comes, and I think this is the bit that doesn't help us. It feels so detached. And again, this is a similar experience across organizations, not the same. So I'm sure there is a lot healthier interactions that can happen there. I'm just trying to show the most common kind of tropes. On the other side, if you're working, generally this happens in big companies that are technical, you would have the kind of career ladder would be engineer, maybe principal or staff, maybe a few years ago that didn't exist, but it would be senior, slightly more senior or whatever, something in between architects, right? And these days, this is called principal or staff. So now there's distinguished in some places as well. Again, company dependent, but what you do have is that you're aiming to be an architect. And this is architect without any, like the title is generally architect, or is some other title, and you're doing architecture stuff. It's the same is actually implied in the role of principal or staff, and even in senior, like you're just doing architecture at a kind of smaller scale, really. So in there, the feedback loop between whoever is doing architecture and people implementing, the feedback looks a little bit tighter than on the corporate thing that we were talking about before. And in fact, I had the fortune of working with one really good architect, and he was working with us. He was sitting with us. This is like about 10 years ago, and I learned so much from him. He would talk to us about what he's thinking about. This is like many layers away, showing us and explaining how the whole system works. We were working on a particular area of this very large company, and he was talking to us about how we fit it in the context of all of that, and how what we were supposed to do when we could be like, oh, this is not going to work because X, Y, Z. And he would have answers, or even go, I don't know, let's figure it out. And I think that works so much better than not having that, basically. So I think that's two very different flavors. Again, sorry, one more thing. I also worked in big companies where the architect is like, who knows what they're doing? It's a big company, the ladder is the same. It's like software senior, some name, principal staff, architect. The architects are, well, or you talk to them, but they seem detached. So you can have this detached lack of feedback experience in both words, depending on the organization. And I think the feedback is the feedback loop on design so that we can learn. So the organization can learn and the systems can get better is essential for building good systems, which is kind of why these days I specialize on that. So what I'm trying to do right now with the work I do is all about building systems that enable people to work together and that try to bring feedback into the loop. However your organization is set up, you can only build better systems if you include the information of the people that are making the systems there.
Yeah. Oh,
How
thanks,
does
Andrea.
this how
Yeah.
does this compare to you? I'm so curious because
Yeah.
this whole thing started because I was like, how is it for you? And how's it for you here, especially in New Zealand? Because I understand that different areas of the world have different ways of working, patterns. You can't just switch because someone else is doing it. And maybe you shouldn't.
Yeah. So I try to summarize what you just said, and then I can give you my perspective. So I think what I'm hearing is, I guess there's probably different ways of how solution architect or software architect work in the company. I think one sort of way you mentioned about solution architect have his own team, and they are not sitting with the engineering team. So basically they work in a silo, they do the design, and they kind of push it down to the engineering team to say, here's the standard, here's the design, go to implement it. It just doesn't have the feedback loop. By the time they'll be like, oh, I don't quite like this, but then you'll be like, oh, it's already approved. Yeah, just go and figure out and implement it. Another better way would be, I think the software architect is they might not hold the software architect title. They might hold like a principal engineer or distinguished engineer, but they are like a fully embedded with the engineering team, and they're doing the design, and they can like engage with all the developer and all the technical teams, and they get quite a good quite a quick feedback, and then we can have a quick huddle and quick discussion, and then because the feedback loop, the iteration, that can improve the technical decision quite a bit because it's they are part of the team rather than work in isolation, as you
Yeah,
mentioned, like the
by the
ivory
way,
tower. Yeah.
the thing here is that they're not always with the team. So like sometimes they would be with you for something and then they are focused on something else. The good thing is they are a human person that you know. So you can, if after a couple of months something is happening, you can be like, hey, person, we think we're gonna do this big change that we want to make sure that we get a picture of what's happening. Like we want to make this local change or some other change. Can you help us see how that will affect everything else?
Yeah.
And I think that's when it can be really valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess I probably see this more happening more on the software side, or maybe there is a lot of the content on YouTube because a lot of the big companies or AWS or Salesforce or Microsoft, they have a lot of past employee doing content like this to share
Mm.
their experiences. My experience, so for those big company, their key business are still software, like when they mention about their product, right? That's quite a different from a corporate world. In the corporate world, we don't, like when I work for a local government, right? We don't write software. We have a business to fulfill. Like for example, we need to provide parking services. We got parking building that we need a parking software to manage. We got on-street parking. We need a software or different mobile apps to be able to let people to pay for parking or check availability. And because we're not a software company, we don't normally write those software. We purchase existing software. So an architect in those environment, we don't we're not a software architect. We just come in. We might do a option comparison depending on what's the business want. The business obviously have a strategy and has a business requirement. And we go out there to compare different parking software and we recommend based on what we understand and go through a normally we call the design review board process to say, hey, this is what we see the requirement, this is the option we have, and we choose this one because it's aligned with us better. And we go through that process with the business or on behalf of the business. And once we got the decision approved, and then we work with a particular vendor with a high level design. Because that high level design is still not writing code. Is normally with a company, we already have a customer identity services. We got our own sort of hosting environment. It could be a cloud, it could be a private cloud or public cloud or on premise. And we got our sort of policy or local regulation, like if it's hosting any personal identifiable information. You need to do a PIA, like personal privacy impact analysis. So there's a lot of regulation we need to making sure they are within the boundary of the regulation. So we kind of work with the vendor to come up with a high level design. But the high level design is really one is obviously we trace back all the business requirement, making sure the software can do what functionally it can do. We also obviously gathering a lot of non-functional requirement that including a lot of the regulation or compliance and policy that we need to adhere to, and we're making sure that it's compliant, it can comply with all the non-functional requirement. And then we go through the design review board again before we go to build it. So in the corporate world, I would say a lot of the the solution architect are in the ivory tower because they will never talk to the actually engineering team, because in those company, their goal is making sure it having that business alignment, policy alignment, governance alignment. It probably have less oversight on how they actually implement the code. We probably wouldn't care whether they implement in C#, Java, or Python. I wouldn't say we don't care. It's not in our interest. We just look at the product. If the product can do what it do, it can be secure and compliance and meet all the regulation that can, it will be a good product. So that's just my feeling. And then we got a lot of the work because I recently joined a startup. So when I look at the startup, a lot of the software architect, you wouldn't manage more than probably 5 projects because we have to really deep understand a lot of the code. And you'd be lucky you're juggling between 2 major projects because you have to really understand the code and structure and all of that. But when I work in the corporate architect, once I get really good, because when I say really good is I understand how the CRM, how the contact center software, I'm becoming more of a domain expert. Sometimes I can take on like 15 projects at a time. Obviously, they are in the different phases of they're in different phases. Some are initiation, some are already in their implementation, some are in my design phase. But I can take a lot of work on. So my job is really having meetings and making sure that I got all the information I need and put it into the high level design. So I guess probably put it in the summary for the corporate world, the solution architect is more serving that governance role. So a lot of the things around documentation, engaging with the wider business and IT stakeholder, being a bridge between the IT and business, making sure they talking to each other and they understand each other. So that's my view. Yeah.
One thing though, in the other flavor of this role, you're supposed to also do that. I think the key difference from what I'm hearing from you seems to be all about user experience, maybe. Like there is that, or perhaps something to do more about the end experience for the user. For example, in a company where either the software is the product, or for example, an e-commerce shop, they're selling some stuff, and the product is not really. I mean, people are trying to buy stuff, but the software is a vehicle, so like some sort of SaaS platform. If people are not using the software and there's no revenue, this is a big problem. No matter how much governance and everything, like you have excellent governance or your product is beautiful, nobody cares. You have no revenue, you are not meeting outcomes, you're dead. And so any signals that kind of show that, again, companies vary, but like a company that is not doing well, but from whatever their goal is going to come back to you as someone building that. And that means like the way to reach this kind of signals in a very clear way is, let's say you're trying to deliver some software. Business comes to you and say, we need to start doing the new thing, some new feature, something that is slightly broken. It doesn't matter. One of those things that you need to do. If you're not able to do it, or you're not being able to do it fast enough, this is a very big problem for you, because the reality is that your software, again, whatever it is, you bought it, you made it, irrelevant. You want to make sure that you're trying to help the company. Your system enables the company, and the company is constrained by the software. So these two things are always in tension. And I think that becomes, perhaps, again, this might be my bias of being or coming from engineering, I always see this tension as the key thing that as someone with an architecture or basically someone is designing software needs to be very conscious of. Is our technical strategy aligned with the business strategy? And I think one of the things that I see a lot, especially engineers kind of forgetting, is that we're there for doing the thing, and you need to know what the thing is. And it's so hard when you're just really focused on a particular area of your job, right? Like, let's say you're really into governance and you're like, oh, the privacy thing, you're just so focused on that, you forget actually we're losing money left, right, and center.
Yeah. So I think this will be definitely a very highly debated topic, given that how many interaction we have. We'll definitely do some follow-up based on all the good comments and also people's sort of opinion on this. But I think we can wrap up for now. I guess the next one I want to ask Andrea is, as I mentioned earlier, I got asked a lot around like how to become a architect and get into architecture. And I personally believe architecture is a great journey. So do you want to share like maybe someone want to break into architecture or who kind of new to architecture? What is your advice on that?
For sure. I think the best way to do architecture is to make explicit the fact that you're already doing it. In every team, no matter where in the organization, you're probably doing some decisions. So you could see that those decisions are happening. And a key thing of architecture is understanding pros and cons and being able to give good, useful feedback on something. So if this is not present in your organization, a beautiful way to start is to start writing decision records. So this could mean, oh, we're choosing between these two databases, and maybe you're part of the process or not. But you could be like, oh, the decision is we need to store the data somewhere, which this happens pretty much to everyone, right? And so you could be like, oh, we chose between Dynamo or Postgres, or actually we decided we didn't need to store anything for some reason. And there's some stuff that actually works that way because you're processing. And it could be that you write about it, you write the pros and cons, and then you write comments that people like, Ben said that Dynamo is really easy or hard to learn. Again, this is very subjective, and that our team would benefit from using it. Then about Postgres, you could have other comments, etc. So this is one way that you can do something right now. Start actually doing more deliberate things about seeing and understanding your decisions. The other thing you can do is understanding your system. Do you know what your company does? You're in a team, whichever that team is. Your team does something. How does that systems that you build fit in terms of itself and also your adjacent teams? In precise terms, not just like, oh, they do pricing. What does that mean? Why? Have you talked to them ever? Say hello, go grab a coffee. And I think that would be my advice. I'd love to hear yours, actually.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Yeah, I think the advice pretty sound. I think I quite like it, what he's saying, make it explicit that you're already doing architecture. I think that's quite a good thing because people would definitely want to hire people who already have experience in this area. Another thing I probably want to add is probably what we just discussed before. Company or core architect, right? So my title currently is called implementation architect. I have title around enterprise architect, enterprise solution architect, and whatever architect title that I has. Making sure you actually understand what this company is looking for. As you mentioned, if it's easier, if you want to apply within the company that you work for, just grab a coffee with the people who are already working the architect, really talk to them and understand what they're working on. Because from my experience or from our early discussion, depending on the company, depending on the project, they have quite a different expectation on what architect actually do. I even get sold by one of the outsourcing company I worked for as a mobile architect. So when I come in, basically my job is try to help them to publish app on App Store. And I never did. So I have to go back to ask for some help to do that. But then those are I think those are probably the challenges within the architecture, as you mentioned earlier, is even we work in the architecture, sometimes we get confused around what we actually are doing. We thought we know that this profession really well. After I think I've been in this profession for more than 10 years. I still struggling. Like I still need to doing the conversation with people to say, hey, I got this title. Like, what do you expect? I got the job description, I got this title, but what you think I should do or add value? So I think that's quite important. Again, you mentioned about having coffee and networking. I think that's definitely good to do. Another thing, I guess, what I'm trying to do, and with help with Andrea and other architects, is we are lacking communities. There are a lot of different developer communities, and we are lacking the community. And that's one of the reasons people don't really understand our profession. So that's why we want to have this podcast so that we can get as many solution architects, software architect, or whatever you have architect title or doesn't that you think you're doing architecture to come on the show to share the experience. So this way that people understand what we are doing, understand that doesn't need a title, like you can actually do doing architecture as yeah,
I have a
yeah,
great news. So if
yeah,
you're in New Zealand,
yeah,
actually I'm running an event storming workshop on the
yeah,
17th
yeah,
of September. It's free. And
yeah,
also as for communities, I don't know if, but there is an online community called Virtual Domain-Driven Design. But just focus, we focus in domain-driven design, which is a way to design software. But also it's not extremely narrow focus. We have all kinds of different talks. Some of them might be useful and interesting to this particular audience. So please join us. We run events every month. But also, yeah, I think I think being open and curious is always the way to learn more. So I absolutely love what you're doing with this
yeah,
podcast,
yeah.
Ben.
So
From comments from other people, I'd love to hear what they're doing because I'm sure there's more happening that we know, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'll put what Andrea just mentioned on our show note. Hopefully, we'll get the editing done before the event so we can publish in time. So I think we had a really good discussion. We almost at the end of this sort of episode. I guess before we wrap up, so AI is definitely a hot topic, right? Do you want to share sort of your thoughts on AI, especially how do you see it shaping the architecture roles?
Yes, absolutely. So I think we're seeing a plethora of different ways in which people are using an AI. I see some companies using AI in a way that completely they changed their development process completely. From today, they went like, let's go all in. They are having some successes and some failures. Other companies are taking a more, well, let's try a little bit, and we like this bit, or let's try a little bit, a more cautious approach. And as a consultant, I get to see many companies at the same time. I also am trialing it out myself in my own projects to see what works for me, what doesn't. One thing that seems clear to me is that this is a very fast moving, quite dangerous, really, and very powerful technology. So I think my take on it is to try to hear as many people and their experiences and see which bits of their processes is something that they can that I can adopt and when I should adopt it. Because as people that kind of deal with decisions and architecture and governance, we're acutely aware of how we need to think about the pros and cons of any technology. So I think the best thing we can do right now, all of us, is look, learn, experiment, take notes, and see where each of these technologies help you. I think also there's AI, but actually there's this particular. It's like, should you use Claude Code for this particular task? Yes, no. And it's like, this is my heuristics for this are this. It could be like, well, there's problems with compliance. Probably I need to use a lot of identity stuff. I'm not going to let it push to production. But maybe if you're doing something else that is a little bit less risky, you can take a little bit more risk. Again, just be aware of the risk is where I will put a lot of effort. Also, there is some issues that haven't been addressed that have come to the fore in the last couple of days with some legal threats. Like there has been some copyright stuff that came out and possibly a lot of big trials that would mean a lot of money for Anthropic and other AI companies because they're sources of data are not known, and they're obviously from copyright material. So I think, as usual, learn from yourself and others, adopt the bits that you feel like it's safe for you. That would be my take.
Cool. Thanks, Andrea. I think you gave us sound advice. I think that's what I'm practicing. Look, read, and just experiment and use it, and also watch how you don't give all your personal information in those big platforms. Okay, thanks, Andrea. Thanks for joining us today, and your insights are incredibly valuable. I know our listener will really enjoy and have a lot of takeaway from this. To everyone listening, don't forget to subscribe and check more episodes of the Solution Architect Show. And I mentioned before, if you are working as a solution architect or software architect, please drop us a note, and we are very welcome you to be a guest on our show to share your journey. And thanks for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.